Hi, church. My, what a stretch of, what an odd season that we've been having lately. I know the introverts are just going, this is what I do, and I know the extroverts are saying, when can this end? And I don't know if you're doing well or if you're having a hard time. I hope you're doing well. If you're having a hard time right now, I just want you to know that that's okay too, that God's people have a long history of going through difficult times and learning to walk with the Lord in more profound ways through the difficult times. And so if you're not doing well, I have something I'd like to share for you that hopefully will encourage you. And if you are doing well, then hopefully you'll hear this and take it with you for when the discouraging times come. I want to just simply or briefly consider King David and his story. If you're not familiar with King David, he was anointed to be king by Samuel as a young man, the man that everybody overlooked. They didn't think he had any place to be anointed as king, and yet that was the one who God chose. And like so many of us, when we feel this sense of calling that God has something in mind for us, he doesn't actually become that particular role right away. There's a preparation time, there's a growth time that occurs for him. And so David's anointed king as a young man, and then he goes immediately or shortly after that into serving the existing king of Israel, the king of Israel, King Saul, who did not have a heart that desired to please God, but Saul had a heart to build his own kingdom. And Saul's heart and God's heart became at odds with one another, to the point that God eventually said, Saul, I'm going to remove you. I'm tearing the kingdom away from you and I'm giving it to someone else. Saul eventually discovers that the someone else is David. And so he devotes all of his energy into getting rid of David. He hunts him down as an animal using the armies that are available to him. And so David finds himself on the run for a long time, and he is so acquainted to pain, he is so acquainted to betrayal and heartache. That is what David knows. And while he's on the run, he gathers with him a group of men. These are the ones who the scriptures describe. They're disgruntled, they're unhappy, and yet they gather around David. And the big picture, the spoiler alert, is these guys end up becoming the mighty men. And so these are powerful warriors as well who do great things. But they're a little difficult to control. They're manly men, warrior men, and very useful, but also very dangerous as well. And so there's a scene in 1 Samuel chapter 30, verse 1, which illustrates what I'm hoping to bring out this afternoon. 1 Samuel 30, verse 1, Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. Ziklag is the city where David and his men and their families are living. The Amalekites have come through and conquered it while they were gone, like your house is robbed when you're not there. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and all the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. That is an extremely appropriate response when you come home and you find your household has been burned and your family members have been taken captive. David's two wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. So David knows the pain personally as well. It's not just his men who have suffered, but David himself is suffering with intense, profound emotional grief. Everybody's in a lot of pain. Verse 6 tells us, And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him. The people want to kill David because of what has happened. The people spoke of stoning him because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. This is the normal response when we have tragedy. When things are happening outside of our control, we want to lash out and pin the blame on others and maybe inflict pain upon others in some odd overflowing attempt to try to make ourselves feel better by hurting someone else. That's the natural tendency. It's not me. It must be everyone else. Somebody needs to be held responsible for this. But then you have David's unnatural response, the end of verse 6. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. David wasn't trying to find strength in his bitterness. He wasn't trying to find strength in his circumstances. His circumstances are terrible. You won't find strength in that. David isn't trying to find strength in the ability and the power of his mighty men, because the reality is these are the ones that are risking his life right now as they're considering whether or not they're going to kill their leader. David doesn't trust his own strength. David, similarly, he doesn't trust his own cleverness as he would do from time to time, but not in this moment. When everybody else is bitter and in pain, David turns to the one that is outside of circumstances, and he trusts in the Lord. And he finds strength in the Lord. What does that mean? Well, I think part of it is the fact that God has given David a number of promises, and so God has been faithful to care for David in some very overt ways over the years, and so David is saying, I'm trusting, I'm believing in God's faithfulness. I'm finding my strength in that. That will be the strength that will cause me to go on because of God being a faithful God in my life, and so I'm going to trust him. And so what does he do? Well, the rest of chapter 30, he seeks the Lord's direction, and God gives him direction, and then he obeys once he hears what he's supposed to do, and then he experiences the benefits of obedience, which ends up, long story short, everybody gets their families back safe and sound. But as it pertains to us today, I want to ask this one central question, and it's this. What are you drawing, what are you finding your strength in today? Where are you finding your hope? There are so many places we can find our hope right now. Common places would be our political leadership, our governors, the White House, and so forth. And I believe for the most part, these people, they have the best of intentions, but they don't know how to solve things. They're humans, therefore they're finite. Therefore they don't have all knowledge and all ability. Our medical systems are wonderful, and the Spokane area has great resources in this area, but we can see also they're finite, they are limited. Our economy has been strong in some ways, but we see now how vulnerable it is, and so we can't place our trust in things like political leaders or medical systems or the economy. They have value, but ultimately all of these things, they're under the God who has ordained them. They're under the authority of the God who has ordained them, and so we can't trust in these smaller, lesser things as the one that will give us our hope, because they will change. We can trust in all those things and experience disappointment and bitterness, or we can strengthen ourselves in the Lord and the God who cares for his people, who has promised to care for his people, who is continually engaged in working this redeeming, saving, rescuing work, the God who has so many other good promises to fulfill. And so it's my hope that we as the church in our community would be about that, would be about finding our strength in the Lord, that we would find our roots and our hope in the Lord, and that we would therefore be empowered to live for him in the way that we care for and minister to others, in the way that we treat our family members, and the way that we interact with those who are in need or those who are at risk. And so may you be strengthened today as you go out, or be strengthened this week. Have a great week. We will catch up with you hopefully soon, hopefully in person soon, Lord willing.